Normally I'm very loud. There it goes. Hello, everybody. It is May 21st, 2025, and this is the Flagstaff Heritage Preservation Commission coming to you at 4 p.m. We will start with a roll call.
Emily, Dale,
Present.
Alicia Hayes,
Present. Amy, can you mute yourself, please? Thank you.
Abby Buckham,
Present.
Bernadette Burcham, Jesse Dominguez,
Present.
Amy Horn,
Present.
Duffy Westheimer.
Here.
Thank you.
All right, we will now move on to the land acknowledgement, which will be read this month by Commissioner Dominguez.
The Heritage Preservation Commission humbly acknowledges the ancestral homelands of this area, indigenous nations, and original stewards. These lands, still inhabited by native descendants, border mountains sacred to the indigenous people. We honor them, their legacies, their traditions, and their continued contributions. We celebrate their past, present, and future generations who will forever know this place as home.
Thank you. We will now move on to public comment. If there's any member of the public who has a comment on an item not on the agenda, this is your chance. Someday. All right. The approval of minutes. Any questions, comments, clarifications, or amendments to the minutes from last month on April 16th? It says March 19th. I have an amendment for this month's minutes. Anything from April 16th? All right, then can I get a motion to approve?
I move to approve the minutes from April.
And a second?
I'll second that motion.
All right, we have a motion from Commissioner Hayes and a second from Commissioner Dominguez. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed?
I'm abstaining.
Any abstentions? Any abstentions?
Me, Duffy.
Thank you. All right, we will now move on to public hearings. These items might take a while, so if we end up going long, I am amenable to a break if people need to use the restrooms, just so you know. All right, we'll start with 418 East Birch Avenue, and it's Phase 1 Cultural Resource Study.
Great, thank you, Chair Dale. I'll give a quick intro, and then the applicant and historic preservation consultant Lynn Neal is here, as well as the property owner. So if there are any questions. So this is a Phase 1 cultural resource study for a residential building downtown that has never been evaluated before. It's outside of our downtown overlay and the various downtown historic districts, hence the need for a cultural resource study. And so that's what's before you today to approve, review and approve the cultural resource study and its significance findings for the building, as well as the impact findings for the proposed rehabilitation remodel of the home. And I included a memo in the application packet, which is not usual for Phase 1 cultural resource studies. Usually I include staff reports for certificates of appropriateness and talking about how a project does or does not meet a certificate of appropriateness. Of course, this is outside of that process as it's not in one of the overlays, but I did include a memo and as it is my opinion that to change the recommended action slightly from the requested action, which is, to approve as is, and my recommended action, as explained in the memo, is to approve the significance finding outlined in the Phase 1 Culture Resource Study, and to accept a revised study identifying that the second story addition is a major impact under our code to the house, but proposing that restoration of the original clapboard siding, either what they can restore of the existing fabric that they uncover from the stucco or replacing in kind as mitigation for that impact.
So basically, that's just the same thing that's enumerated in the report, but with slightly revised language. So
So-
instead of it being no impact with salvaging the siding, it's a major impact, and salvaging the siding is the mitigation.
Exactly, yes.
Okay.
As presented in the report, it talks about the whole scope of the project, and that as both items are proposed, it overall got to no major impact. And I am looking at it under the code slightly differently. So that is my recommendation. And now do you have any other questions for me, or would you like me to have the consultant, Lynn, come up and talk about the report and findings?
Yeah, that's Lynn. Yeah, I think that'd be great.
I was hiding behind Lauren. Fire away. If
Yeah, do you have anything
questions.
to add from what Lauren explained?
I don't disagree that it's a significant impact, major impact, I guess, to use Lauren's language. And I thought that I had discussed the use of clapboard siding to bring it back to the original siding as essentially a mitigative measure, but probably just wasn't definitive enough in the language, so I don't have any problem with those changes.
Questions or comments from commission?
So I think major is a relative term. It's somewhat subjective. It is a big change, but it's not really a big change. The change is bigger because of the building codes. It says it on page 2. It wasn't really going to be 5 feet ultimately. It wasn't. So I think that's not on the applicant. That's on the city. So he has no choice, the owner, on how high they went, because that wasn't his original plan. And that using dormers, actually it's a half story instead of a second story. And the dormers are not the full length of the house. So I think that's their effort, the owner's effort in keeping the impact as small as possible, but still getting useful space upstairs. So in this cultural resource study, it talks about a second story, but I would say it's only a half story because they're going to use the attic space, not a full second story where it's 8 feet all the way to the sides or higher. So those are my comments. Also, you use town site, and I don't know why, and I didn't pull out the topo map to see if the original half section donated by the 50th Congress of the United States included over there, but I saw that in another cultural resource study that it says town site. But if you're going to use that term and it is in the original, it'd be nice to clarify that it's in the original town site
Okay.
established by Congress rather than what we call town site now, because that's kind of confusing. But I think that the owner who wants to stay in his house should be applauded. It's actually a narrow house. And so without changing the footprint of the house, it can only go up. So, he's surrounded by 2 stories to the west, 3 stories to the east, and 2 stories behind. So it's not really going to stand out that much in terms of the context and the location and the site and the feeling. And I think he should be applauded for wanting to stay there and keep the house as opposed to raising it and replacing it, which is what most people might be tempted to do.
Other questions and comments from commission? I had one question. It was hard for me to visualize exactly what was changing based on the drawings that we were given. Can you guys
Right.
like walk me through what that's actually gonna like? I just like couldn't tell what was original and what wasn't. Did you
Yeah.
bring a
it's-
tape measure, Duffy? I wasn't concerned. I just
Say
couldn't figure out
increase
where it
one
was going up and what was like where the dormers were going.
Okay. Um, yeah, you can, I guess if you look at the east and west elevations, I mean, what you see in the roof line is the dormer on each side that are being added. So hopefully I mean, that's probably the most significant change in the roof line. And then you can see that the height increase overall is 8 feet. But as Duffy pointed out, if, with the pitch of the roof, you really only see a 4 foot increase in height kind of at the exterior, except in the dormers, if that makes sense. I know it's a little hard to visualize on here.
Can you use the mouse and like circle things?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, sorry. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so this,
It's actually 5 feet total height.
Right,
change.
total height.
So, the new building is 5 feet taller than what it is now. And if you look at the east elevation, you can see the dormer, is set back like halfway into the house. So if you look at the south elevation, it, it kind of looks like, you probably wouldn't even see that dormer from the south elevation because it's so far set back. It's clearer on the east elevation. So the change is, basically the front room, the lower roof is exactly the same building, same rafters, same roof structure. And then everything back is raised up 4 feet, new roof, we'll see what needs to be done. New,
So which little line is the original and which one's the new height?
oh, okay, so
The dotted gray
the
line,
dotted line.
the
Okay.
faint
That
one is where it's.
Okay.
No, it's the one
Okay.
underneath
Thank you.
it is- yeah.
No, I didn't think it was. I was just trying to visualize it in my head as to how it would. And the south elevation's the front of the house.
Yes.
Okay. All right.
And then that little window is being added in the second story as well on the facade.
Thank you. That helps.
yeah, the drawings actually make it look kind of more robust than the actual. I mean, to me, it almost makes it look more than 5 feet, but
Yeah, it's just,
I mean, just,
yeah, the eastern elevation kind of shows where that dormer is. It's not stacked on
right.
as much as it looks like on the south elevation, but it's basically, it's the same elevation, essentially. It's just 5 feet taller to get some more headroom, be able to get stairs in there and, trusses that meet today's codes and all that.
Thanks. Sarah, did you have something to add or?
Yeah, I did want to add that the property owner did come in, their architect came in the fall. And Paul Moore, who's the architect, and I did sit down, and there is several mitigation points from the original like drafty design where they did take into account, including dormers. They looked down the street to match dormers a few houses down. That was another modification to a historic structure, as well as the way that they've used those to like mitigate the street frontage. And so that many of these features were well thought out in advance with both the architect and staff. Lauren wasn't on yet, but I think it was maybe October that this property owner started working on it. So I wanted to acknowledge that many of the mitigations you see were well thought out, and they were early to include HP so that they could make those adjustments, which we appreciate. And I know Abby has her hand up online.
Yes, Commissioner Buckham.
Oh, I had a similar question as Commissioner Dale, but it has now been answered. But I'm also very pleased with the effort that has gone into this restoration. And yes, also thank you to the owners as well.
Commissioner Horn?
Yeah, I'm just going to echo what Commissioner Westheimers and Buckham said. I'm also, it's really nice to see this sort of really thoughtful addition and expansion instead of just big, massive remodels that are really changing the character. So I appreciate that as well.
Other questions or comments from, yes, Commissioner Westheimer.
Do you have a question about the windows? The new windows, will they be at the facade or will they be set in? Have you thought that far yet?
I haven't thought that. But yeah, they'll most likely be at the facade. There'll be new construction windows.
Other questions or comments from commission? All right, if we are ready to make a motion, we have sort of three options before us. One is to approve the study as it is. One is to approve this study with the conditions that Lauren has laid out for us in the recommended action. And alongside that, we have two options. We can either approve it and let Lauren view the changes and approve them administratively, or we could approve them but have them come back to us for like our final approval.
And I would just add, if Commissioner Westheimer would like the revisions in the document that you asked for, that to also add that to the motion as well.
If people agree, I mean, I'm not the dictator here, but if the rest of the commission agrees that those should be corrected or changed, then yeah.
What needs to be corrected and changed?
That it's really a half story, not a second story.
Oh, okay.
And that if the word town site is used, the source of that word should be identified.
Oh, okay.
I agree with that, Duffy.
I would like to make a motion to whatever Duffy said.
I don't think that's going to fly. But you can read directly off the recommended action. So just to incorporate what Duffy has said, we would like the report to be revised to reference citations to the use of town site and to reframe the from second story to 1.5 story.
Duffy, I think you need to make that motion, and then I'll second it.
And then are we going to approve it with Lauren's recommendation? To just sort of reconfigure the language so it's not no impact, they'll save the siding, but it's a major impact and the siding is the mitigation to that impact. You can just read it off of here. And then the final question is, do we want to see it again, or are we good with Lauren approving, making sure that these changes have been made? Okay. So does that need to go in the motion too? That it'll be approved by the HPO administratively?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I will move to approve the significance findings as outlined in the 418 East Birch Avenue Phase 1 Cultural Resource Study with the conditions of changes of using 1.5 story as opposed to 2 story and identifying the source of the word town site for clarity. And then that the HPO can approve administratively with those changes made to the cultural resource study, and that I guess saying it's a major impact to do the addition and proposing restoration of the clapboard siding as a mitigation for the impact.
Thank you, Commissioner Westheimer. Do we have a second?
I'd second that motion.
Second from Commissioner Dominguez. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, great work, guys. Thank you so much. We will now move on to 19 West Birch Avenue and the Phase 1 Cultural Resource Study.
Yes, all right. And this one, all of our representatives are online. So same, I will do a quick overview and then we have two representatives from Cornerstone Environmental who wrote the report, as well as it looks like a representative from Capri Inc., Jim O'Connell, is online as well. So this is a phase 1 culture resource study for the building at 19 West Birch, which similarly is not in a historic district and has not been evaluated before. This is in the downtown historic overlay zone. So that there is that note there, but it has never formally been evaluated before, and that is the purpose of the study. And as you will remember from our discussions last meeting, and we had 4 approvals in the approval section last meeting talking about the former Deckers building and Shoe Hospital building. These are all proposed to be part of the same development, but that is not before you today. We're just talking about the significance findings of it, the findings of the phase 1 culture resource study. So the future hotel parking garage design being in the overlay will need to come in to HPC for a certificate of appropriateness and review for how it meets our design guidelines, but they're not at that stage of the project yet. And as you remember, so the other 2, the letter reports were approved, as well as certificates of no effect for the demolition. And this also, again, does not include a certificate for the demolition. That is the next, both of the certificates' next steps in the process. First is determining the significance of the building. And so any other questions for me before I turn it over to Jack and Samuel online to go over, discuss their report?
I have a question. So this building was evaluated for the downtown overlay, correct?
No. The overlay did not evaluate any buildings. A good chunk of them are in the Railroad Edition Historic District, but not all of them. And it also doesn't include the entire Railroad Edition Historic District. But the overlay is just the area in which the design guidelines and the certificate process applies. But the buildings that aren't in the district or haven't come in for other evaluations have never been formally evaluated before. And so this one has never been formally evaluated before. At the time the time the district was created, it wouldn't have been eligible because of the age of the building. But
So I should have phrased that better. Downtown Historic District, there was a nomination done for that, correct? In the 80s?
that's the Railroad Edition Historic District.
There's no historic downtown one.
Correct. That is not a historic district. There is nothing called the Downtown Historic District. There's the Railroad Edition, and then south of that, the South Side Historic District.
So what age was the Railroad Edition Historic District?
I believe the cutoff was
Evaluated.
probably 1935, like all of the other ones, because they were all done in the mid 80s. So that the period of significance would have cut off then.
That's what I was looking for, when the evaluation was done.
Yeah.
Has that ever been modified to include additional buildings?
Yes, it has been modified to include or remove them. Not very extremely recently that I know of, but it has been. If you want to pull up the entire National Register nomination as it exists with the Park Service, there have been modifications to it. But including like Babbitt's, for example, is one that was not eligible at the time, but after it went through its restoration work, it is now listed in the district. So there have been changes, but this is also outside the boundaries of the district. So to add it, this or any other building outside the boundaries would require a big update to change the period of significance, redraw the boundaries, and then evaluate every other building that would fall inside those boundaries and inside the period of significance. So a bigger project.
When was the downtown overlay established and the purpose of it?
Do you know?
It's in those boundaries.
Yes, it is in the, right. And as I said, it is in the downtown boundaries, which is why it falls under the design guidelines and the certificate process in our code. And the design guidelines are from the 90s. I believe 1990 is so I assume, I don't know the exact year the overlay was established, but That is our oldest one and our oldest design guidelines. And so the purpose of those is for, one, to monitor what's going on with existing historic buildings, and then two, so you are looking at infill or other new development and making sure that it meets the design criteria as established in those guidelines.
Great. Any other questions for Lauren at this time?
I just have a question. How old is this building?
And so maybe this is a good time to turn it over. Jack, do you want to take it and give a quick overview of your report? Perfect.
Certainly, yes. Thank you, Lauren. Good afternoon, commissioners. I'm Jack with Cornerstone Environmental, and my colleague Samuel Hemsley is going to run through a brief presentation on our report and findings, and then we'll move on to discussion and questions. So over to you, Sam.
All right. Hello, everyone. I'm Sam Hemsley, and Jack just introduced himself. We're both Cornerstone Environmental Consulting archaeologists and historians. And for the past little bit, we've been working on the Phase 1 historic resource study for 19 West Birch Avenue. Just kind of a brief overview of the project. We were contracted by Capri to conduct a Phase 1 historic resource study for the proposed Hilton Graduate Hotel and Parking Garage project pursuant to the City of Flagstaff zoning codes. As part of the project, there are plans to demolish all existing buildings and structures, associated infrastructure on the parcel, and the parcel is going to be redeveloped. Also, as previously mentioned, we worked on the shoe hospital and the old Deckers building that are directly adjacent to the parcel to the east. Let me pull up this presentation I've got, and we'll get going. All right, can everybody see that?
Yes.
Perfect, thank you. All right, so just to give you an idea of where we're talking about, this is an aerial image showing downtown, and the building is outlined in the blue right there. It's right off of Beaver and Birch. Some quick important property information, a brief summary of our findings. Street address for the building is 19 West Birch Avenue, though this is sometimes referred to as 120 North Beaver Street. And the building itself was constructed in late 1950, leading into early 1951. The APN number is 100-19-004-8. It was roughly half an acre. For our subdivision, we're using Flagstaff Town Site. And I know there was some questions about this a little earlier in the meeting, but we pulled that information off of the online county parcel viewer. The property is on block 19, lots 13 through 18. And for the period of significance, we're using 1882 to 1975. This roughly aligns with the Railroad Addition Historic District, though may go a little bit past it. There's some discussion about the downtown historic overlay zones. Here's the building in relation to all those. The labeling is a little confusing, but it's in the larger pink downtown historic overlay zone. And the cherry color is a railroad addition. So it's close to, but not quite in the railroad addition overlay. As we studied the old City Hall, one of the things we researched was the Flagstaff City Council and its membership. In the late 1890s and early 1900s, the City Council of Flagstaff was often limited to 1 to 3 individuals, but over the years, the council grew as the city did. In 1957, Winslow updated their city's charter to use a council manager system, and this inspired Flagstaff in 1958 to put together a commission to see if whether or not Flagstaff could shift over to a council manager system as well. This was during the time period that the City Hall building was in use as City Hall. And after a lengthy discussion and various meetings with the public, Later that year, the city charter was changed, and we switched from a mayor council system to a council manager system that was used today. During its time as the City Hall building, 11 mayors served. These are in order: Henry Hutchinson, Kenneth Switzer, Edward Curley, Peter Linden, Charles Saunders, Roland Wheeler, Sylvan Herrenberg, William Irwin, Dale Nelsons, Robert Moody, and Paul Babbitt Jr. Out of these 11, Roland Wheeler is probably the most notable because he was the longest serving. He served 8 years. And during his term of service, that's when the city switched over to the council manager system. He was really notable for helping establish the role of the mayor under the new system, setting forth precedent for future mayors. He kind of helped outline that role for future mayors. Also, T. Maggie Pullman served as the first city manager. He served until his retirement in 1963. And he also shaped the role for future managers. For the efforts in serving the city, Mayor Wheeler had Wheeler Park named in his honor, and City Manager Pullman had the airport named in his. Through the 1950s and 1970s, the study building housed both the Flagstaff Police and Fire Departments in addition to the City Hall Center. This appears relatively common, as the previously used City Hall, which was just about a block south, did likewise. The police department operated out of the east wing of the building, while the fire department operated out of the southern wing. Various other departments also operated out of the City Hall, like the water and sewage department, but were not involved with anything particularly notable during our examined time period. The first department.
Sorry, 1 second, Samuel.
Of course.
Some of us are having trouble hearing you.
No worries. I have to use, let me get a little bit closer. I'm using a built-in microphone in my laptop.
Okay.
So I apologize if the audio.
Opinion is that's better. Thanks.
Perfect. The City Hall was the first civic department to become completed at the study building. It opened in April 1951, and all the other departments opened shortly after. By 1952, Flagstaff Police Department employed 9 full-time police officers with 3 squad cars with up-to-date equipment, and growing population meant more facilities were required. So in 1963, the police department saw an addition by the original architect, Robert Blakey, which added some additional jail facilities and added in a dark room. Much like the police department, the fire department also expanded with city growth. In 1952, the department had 3 full-time employees and 13 volunteers, but by 1959, it had 23 full-time employees and 17 volunteers. As demand increased over the years, so did the workload in the department, and as a result, over time, the work week and requirements for employees generally increased from the department standard of 40 hours per week to 56 hours per week. And this kind of fluctuated back and forth as demand kind of varied throughout the years. 2 police chiefs served during the building's period of significance. William Eberson's from 1945 to 1963, and Elmo Maxwell from 1963 to 1980. Both of them are shown here in a newspaper clipping. Maxwell is giving Eberson a watch as an award for his service. As Flagstaff's population continued to decline, both departments grew with the population to meet increased demands for the services. However, as City Hall, the police department, the fire department, and various other civic services were based out of the same building, the departments were all faced with growing pains and cramped conditions which hindered their development. As a result, each civic department began to look at moving their operations to other properties around the city. The fire department left the study building in 1980. The police department left in 2000 to where they are today. And the City Hall sections were relocated out of the building in 1983 to 211 West Aspen, which is, I believe, where many of you are right now. To determine the early property history, we examined some city and county records as well as historic newspaper articles. This is a brief overview of the early property history. In the 1800s, the federal government had a policy of selling or granting a large swath of land to railroad companies to encourage expansion and construction in the Western United States. Some of this land was granted to Atlantic and Pacific Railroad Company. And in 1886, they would then sell off a large amount of this land to one M.E. Daggs, who is a member of a large sheep herder and livestock family. After Daggs came into possession of the land, the lots involved with the study building swapped hands numerous times between individuals and companies, such as the First National Bank of Arizona or the Riordan Merchant Company. Ownership between 1970 and 1950 is a little unclear from the archival records. There was some missing deeds and transferences that we noted. Despite, or maybe because of constant swapping of hands, the lots themselves were fairly undeveloped for being located in such a prime downtown area. Generally only featuring some sheds and horse stables up until immediately prior to the 1950s, where there was a laundromat present in the northwest corner of the property. These are some historic Sanborn maps from 1890, 1895, and 1910, which show kind of how the property developed over time. You can kind of see that the surrounding lots of the property saw some pretty significant development over time, while the property itself predominantly was just some horse stables. These buildings, with the exits through them, are marked on the Sanborn maps as stables or barns, while the buildings surrounding it are residences, dwellings, cabins. Jumping forward in time, after the departure of the police department in 2000, excuse me, the property didn't have any civic function. At some point, possibly soon after the police department left, the building underwent remodeling and was rented out to commercial clients. And today, the building is still rented out to various commercial clients. There's a church office in there. There's a barber shop. There's an insurance office. Moving on to the architecture of the building. The study building at 19 West Birch Avenue was designed by architect Robert Ottaway Blakely III, who was a Phoenix-based architect. Blakely was highly active in the 1950s. Not only did he work on the Flagstaff City Hall, but he also did the Verde Valley branch of the Bank of Arizona building in Cottonwood, a fire station for the city of Prescott in 1956, and a community hospital for Wickenburg, Arizona, also in 1956. Blakely was working during the height of the international style architecture, and the study building reflects some of the style. Diagnostic features of this architectural system, or style, excuse me, consist of rectangular floors, flat roofs, general lack of ornamentation or decorative details, the presence of ribbon windows, curtain walls of glass, cantilevered projections, smooth wall surfaces, and an asymmetrical facade. While we observe that the study building still exhibits some of these, it has a geometric shapes, and it's got a interior volume focused design. It's got flat, planar wall surfaces and asymmetrical layout. Some non-international style architectural features are also present, such as the decorative basalt facade, sloped roofs, and a decorative corrugated sheet metal siding that is present on some sides of the building. Internally, the building consists of one west central section where City Hall functions used to take place, an eastern wing where the police department once resided, and a southern wing where the fire department and associated garage used to be. Also present is a partial basement, which still houses the vault that once held county records, and a partial second story, which lies in the west central section. A sketch map provided by the county assessor's office is located here, and we've got it oriented north-south. So we have where City Hall used to be, we have where the police department used to be, fire department, and to the west, that's a little bit of an annex with a cantilevered canopy that extends out of the building. As can be seen here, the exterior of the fire department exhibits a blocky rectangular shape, glass doors, some float glass windows, and it's the three ribbon windows on the western face of the building. The ribbon windows are immediately above the float glass windows and doorway. Ornamental basalt planters are present flanking the entryway. It should be noted that prior to remodeling, this space was mostly dominated by garage doors used to let the fire trucks in and out of the department, and had a concrete driveway leading up into the garage. The brown framing elements visible are likely original and outline the old garage bay doors. On the north face of the study building, float glass windows with the previously mentioned ornamental corrugated sheet metal elements can be seen. And these windows look into what were once the City Hall offices, but are now offices for various commercial tenants. The eastern face of the building, seen here on the left, looks onto the fire department on the left side of the image, the police department on the right, and the City Hall, which is visible at the second story in the center of the image. The canopy present is a more modern addition and does not appear in historic imagery. We have some historic aerials from 1956, and the canopy does not appear present then, so we think it's a later addition. The western elevation of the building seen here also shows the City Hall entrance in the old fire department wing. The asymmetrical layout and smooth wall surfaces are readily apparent in this image. And if you look just above the white stuff that's in the image, you can make out the cantilever canopy that is present at the City Hall entrance. The partial southern face of the building is entirely the fire department, which features a security door and 3 float glass windows. It demonstrates pretty nicely the uncomplicated aspect of some of the building's design. Some faces of it are pretty unornamented, strictly functional, not a lot going on. The north face of the building, however, shows some more ornamental aspects. You've got that corrugated sheet metal decorative elements that kind of frame all the windows. As mentioned, the interior of the building has undergone significant remodeling, likely to make it more appealing to commercial tenants. On the left, we have a photo of the interior of the old City Hall portion in the west central section. The various doors leading off from this area lead to the various commercial entities. And there's modernized, up-to-date fixtures, modern drinking fountain countertops, likely to make it more appealing to commercial tenants. On the right, we have the old fire department. This photo is taken west, and we're looking out towards Beaver Street. The interior area that you see in this photo would have likely been the garage area for the fire department, which has now been significantly remodeled into office spaces for an engineering office. There's some structural elements, that beam in the image is probably original, but everything else seems to have been replaced. To the left, we have an overview of the basement. The old vault door can be seen there in the back right. The basement is constructed from reinforced concrete, though at some point, and we think it's probably pretty recently, the wooden false wall was erected about a foot away from the reinforced concrete sidewalk. Our guess is that this was added to facilitate internet and electrical wiring, as there's a bunch of internet and electrical components bolted into the wooden wall. Additionally, there's a raised floor present, which appears to have been in place to combat flooding. If you look kind of at the bottom half of the door, you can see a little bit of a cutout that was put in. And examination of the door shows rusting, maybe about 1/10 of the way up. So we think at some point maybe water was seeping into the basement, and they put in a wooden raised floor to help combat that. But to make sure they could access the vault, they put in a little cutout. But because of all these additions, it's pretty difficult to assess the entirety of the basement. We just didn't have access to those sidewalls or the original floor. We really only had access to the reinforced concrete ceiling. On the right, we have one of the rooms that's part of the old police department. It's currently an in-use metalworking shop and artist studio. This is pretty representative of the other rooms of the police department. They're either overtaken by a commercial client, or they have been remodeled and are currently vacant. We have an old cell here on the left. It's got some decorative lighting with some birch lace elements on top of it, which suggests that at some point this might have been either utilized as an office or a storage room. And to the right, we have some old desk space in the police department. After the police department left, this was law offices for a little bit of time. Now it's currently vacant. There's not really too much in these rooms other than the desk space and lighting fixtures, which appear to have been modernized. So kind of taking a look at the history of the property and the, how the building currently presents. We evaluated it underneath the NRHP criteria. We took a look at A, B, C, and D for NRHP criteria, as well as all the city Flagstaff criteria, A, B, C, D, and E. Briefly, for a resource to be considered significant, it must be at least 50 years old and meet at least one criteria. It needs to be associated with an important historical context. It needs to have been built and used within the appropriate period of significance for the identical. And the themes we used for the study were that of community planning and development, significant persons, and architecture. Using these above themes and examining each of the above mentioned criteria, we found that the study building was not significant in any of the above areas. In the next couple of slides, we're going to kind of break down why we reached that conclusion. Looking at NRHP criteria A, this is looking to see if a cultural resource is significant if it's associated with events that have made significant contributions to the broad patterns of history. While the center of the Flagstaff City Council, the actions taken by the council during the use of the building period were examined individually, relatively insignificant to the wider development of Flagstaff and the country. We examined some newspaper clippings, we examined county records to see if there's anything significant going on at City Hall during this time period. There was a lot of postings about seizures and property sales, but it didn't seem to be like there was any significant legislation or civil actions happening at City Hall during this time period. What legislation we did see that was, maybe the first step towards something notable, like the anti-searchlight bill, is better represented by properties that were directly affected by the legislation, like the observatory. And briefly, the anti-searchlight bill was a very limited bill that basically stipulated that within the city limits of Flagstaff, you can't use a searchlight for commercial advertising. But it was pretty limited just towards that. For NRHP criteria B, we're looking at whether or not a cultural resource is significant or if it's associated with significant persons in our past. And for this, we looked at individuals involved with the property or the functions of City Hall at this time. We took a look at each of the mayors, we took a look at city managers, we took a look at police chiefs and fire department staff. And again, most of the actions that these individuals took were essential day-to-day functions and otherwise unnoteworthy. Mayor Roland Wheeler, despite, serving for 8 years, which is the longest a Flagstaff mayor has ever served, and really do anything significant or noteworthy enough to meet this criteria. So, he doesn't meet this, he does not meet criteria B. For NRHP criteria C, the cultural resource is significant if it embodies distinctive characteristics, the type, period, or method of construction that represents the work of a master, that possesses high artistic values, or that represents a significant or distinguished entity whose components may lack individual distinction. The building has some aspects of international style architecture. It doesn't strictly adhere to them. It has ribbon windows, but it also has those ornamental components with the corrugated sheet metal siding. It's got flat planar walls, but it's also got a decorative basalt facade. And some of these images just show kind of what we're talking about. Let's get shoot over to the next slide. You've got the decorative corrugated sheet metal panels. That's the decorative facade. You've got these glass door annexes with ribbon windows up top. Furthermore, there are other buildings downtown, such as the post office building on W.C. Ryle Street, and the County Public Fiduciary Building on North LaRue Street are also examples of international style architecture. So the building is not unique in this area for having international style architecture. Robert Blakely, while known architect, was not significant, notable, or otherwise known to be generally great or recognized. And the renovations which occurred over the years have detracted from the building's original appearance. The removal of the fire department garage and kind of the redecoration of the exterior portion of the building, as well as the renovations on the interior of the property, has detracted from the building's original appearance. For NRHP criteria D, cultural resource is significant if it's yielded or is likely to yield information important to prehistory or history. And we've exhausted much of the data potential of the building through our site visits and through archival research. It's unlikely that the physical structure of the building itself is going to yield any additional information to the point where the property would be eligible underneath criteria D. We checked a lot of archival records. We checked through newspaper records. We checked county records. We did a site visit to the building, and there's not really too much there. As mentioned, we kind of took a look at the city of Flagstaff criteria. And just as the property did not meet any of the NRHP criteria, did not meet any of the city of Flagstaff criteria, pretty one-to-one with the exception of criteria A, which stipulates that under city of Flagstaff criteria, a property is eligible if it's eligible underneath NRHP criteria, which is property is not. So just a summary, the examined legislation we took a look at was not significant and is better represented by effective properties such as Lowell Observatory. Individuals participating in city council and the police and fire departments did not have any noteworthy contributions or influential works to the point that they would meet criteria eligibility. Architecturally, the building is not significant or unique. Other examples are present downtown, and international style architecture is a relatively common architectural style. As the building is not significant, full integrity evaluation is not needed, but to support our claims, we included it in our study. And briefly, we took a look at the location, and this retains a strong level of integrity. The building hasn't moved since its originally constructed location. Its design is diminished by the remodeling that was done to the exterior and interior. Its setting, it's a little bit diminished for the changes to the surrounding neighborhood. There's been
I'm sorry, your last statement was garbled and you're breaking up again. Apologies.
No worries, thank you.
Can you go
thank
back
you for letting me
to
know.
after you talked about design is when it started?
Yes, so for design, we determined that the design was diminished by changes to the exterior and interior. The remodeling efforts that the building has undergone has diminished the originally planned and constructed design that was present. For setting, we determined that the setting was diminished through changes to the surrounding neighborhood. There's been building remodels in surrounding neighborhood, various buildings that come and gone, residential areas that were once residences are now commercial entities, stuff like that. Materials and workmanship is now weak as a result of addition and remodels. They've gutted much of the interior and put in modern equipment and modern utilities. Interiorly and exteriorly, it looks like all the windows and doors have been replaced with modern steel frame doors and modern window fixtures. Feeling, as a result of the remodeling, the feeling is weak. It's hard to walk into or look at some of these departments and get the feeling that they were a historic fire department or a historic police station as a result of much of this remodeling. And as kind of as a result of this, the association is diminished as only the aspect of location is strong. All the other aspects of integrity are weak or diminished. So for our summary recommendations, just a brief recap. The subject area was utilized the City Hall, the fire department, the police department, and various other civic services like water and sewage between 1951 and 1980, after which the various civic operations began to move to other locations. Through archival research and in-person site visits, Cornerstone evaluated the property and determined that the building was not significant under the applicable areas of significance. And per the NRHP and COF criteria, the building is not eligible under any of the criteria, and we recommend that no further historic preservation work be performed and that no mitigation is required. And that's the end of the presentation.
All right,
Thank you, Sam. Much appreciated. We'll open it up to discussion and questions.
Yeah, Commissioner Dominguez.
I see some missing items. Being a lifelong resident. That used to be a city jail also. Used to be the city courts. There was significance with that. I had to take my brother out of jail, so I know that was significant. But you never mentioned the jail. You never mentioned the courts upstairs that were upstairs. Also the horn that was on top of that building that notified the volunteer fire departments. So you set your clock at noon by that horn. We all knew it was lunchtime because that horn. I still have papers that tells you how many blasts of the horns were. So I see that there's some inconsistencies there. That is a significant building for me. I paid my first water bill there. I paid my first traffic fine there. So there's some issues there that I see you sort of glanced over. Judge Otero, that was his court. Judge Brady, that was his court. There was some civil unrest in those buildings, in that building during the 1960s, which maybe is not written down, but I see that there's still a little bit more details that probably need to be written in your report. Thank you.
I will mention the word jail is referenced 11 times in the document, but there is very few mention of courts and no reference to judges. So that is something that could potentially be explored. I also just want to caution the commission that this is a larger item and it might behoove us to keep personal opinions out. I mean, I think speaking as a member of the community that this is an important member for individual communities, but I don't want it to come back to us and saying, Commissioner Dominguez really liked this building and therefore this is an unfair.
I'm sorry,
No,
was just trying to share how personal this building is.
Yes.
And I didn't mean to.
And I think if
cross the line.
If you want to say something about it, it does seem like they conducted interviews with people who worked in the building, but if we would like to see them talk to other members of the community, I think that's something that.
Yeah, Chair Dale, could I jump
in?
Yes,
please do.
I would just, if it might be good to talk about what the commission's potential actions could be. Just to frame your questions and what you might want to ask for. And so one, of course, is to approve the study as is. And just like with the last study, another is to request specific changes or areas for additional research. So Commissioner Dominguez, that, discussing the horn and its removal on top of the building and
civil unrest.
Discussing where the courtrooms were and that, as well as any particular history associated with judges or significant court cases, is something that we could ask for. And if there was something specific about the jail that's missing from the report, that could be asked for. So similar to the last one, your recommendation motion at the end could be to asking for areas where you would like to see specific revisions or additional research conducted to add to the findings of the report. And then again, you could, just like with the last item, you could request those be made and come back to me, or request that the item come back to the commission to review again.
And then our final option would be to disagree with the findings of the report, correct?
Yes, I mean, but I would still leave it as if you disagree with the findings, what would we like revisions to change? You know,
Yes.
so if you disagree with the significance findings, it's because something is lacking in the study. And so you would like to go back and have additional historic context added to, you know, evaluate the significance under that context that appears to be missing, or et cetera.
All right, so it sounds like Commissioner Dominguez has some items that he would like to see reflected in the report that are currently missing.
Well, I definitely think the courts need to be mentioned, especially since we had judges that were in there that made significant impact on the citizens of Flagstaff.
Commissioner Hayes?
Yes, I would like to say that actually I don't agree with your findings of the building not being significant, particularly at the local level for Flagstaff. In the Flagstaff criteria, it calls out political, community buildings. Let's see. Social buildings. Also for design, I don't agree with some of your findings that it doesn't have any integrity for design or materials or feelings or association. I think it does have integrity of design. I think if I had lived here in 1951 and I walked by that building today, I would clearly recognize it. I would see where the fire trucks had come out of the building. The fact that has been infilled with some doors does not change the fact that you can see that those were fire truck bays. I think that it should be looked at more on a local level. I also think looking at the design with the fact that it has the interior building style or an international building style, but at a local level. Flagstaff has its own characteristic vernacular. It has its own style. And the Malapais basalt facade is characteristic of Flagstaff. So I think that makes it even more unique. To me, I look at that building and I see something that is influenced by mid-century modern and has a Flagstaff characteristic to it. And I think it's unique and I think it's a special building.
Thank you, Commissioner Hayes. Anyone else on the commission? Commissioner Westheimer?
Thank you. So I have a lot of comments.
Do you want to do half and then take a break for someone else and then do the other half? Okay.
In the report, it would be nice to have you make a clear connection to those North LaRue properties, because just putting a parcel number is not clear that that's going to be a very large project. And so it would be nice to be able to say, I don't know if technically you need to combine those parcels, but it would be nice that that was made clear that those are all going to be one giant project. Again, the word tout site, if you would please clarify how you're using that word and the source of it. Just to say it comes from the county doesn't matter, because the county website now says that we can't use that for legal descriptions, which is kind of strange. Okay, so I do think that it's a significant building. I agree with everything Commissioner Hayes said and Commissioner Dominguez. It was the city hall, and they rebuilt a new building because there was a Flagstaff building boom at the end of World War II. So they needed a larger city hall. And that's a really important point to be made. The Malpai and the design are significant. You referenced two other buildings, the post office and the county fiduciary building. Yes, they're horizontal, but otherwise there's no connection in design. So we are quickly losing our history here. And I think that if you're going to compare to other buildings, they need to be comparable. And what you compare to, in my mind, are not. I think that when we do adaptive reuse, like with the bays for the fire trucks, you have to do something. So I'll bring that up later about adaptive reuse and integrity, but they had to do something. You couldn't use those bays if you didn't close them in. And I don't think that we have any say about the interior of buildings, especially if you're doing adaptive reuse, you're going to make changes. So I don't care what the old police built room in the basement looks like. I don't care. It's still being used, and that is important. Can I do a couple?
You're going so quickly, so yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Let's see. And I'm positive that it's absolutely recognizable. If someone from 1951 saw that building today, they would absolutely recognize it. It's very unique. It's very special to Northern Arizona and Flagstaff. And I don't agree with saying that a lot of the findings are weak. I just don't agree with it. That's a subjective determination. You showed a really interesting photograph of how it was constructed. I'd like to know more about that. And I don't remember seeing that in the report. Yep, that picture on the right. I'd like to know more about how it was constructed, and I would also like to know if the stone is veneer or if it's structural masonry. I would like to know that too, because that's not being done anymore. And
Yeah,
then
that photo is not in the report. That was one of my comments as well.
that would be nice to have included in the report. And I would like to know more about it. I think that's really significant and should be explained, that construction method. I have a question about, and it's not a historic preservation necessarily, but does this project go before sustainability and addressed with the carbon neutrality plan? Because 3 buildings being demolished has a huge impact on sustainability and carbon neutrality. That's all I need to say about that.
Do you want staff to answer that question?
Sure.
Sure. Okay, so the properties are zoned central business district, right? Central business. And so they are not requesting any discretionary decisions from council. And they're not needed to demolish a building. So there's no other planning and zoning. First of all, Sustainability Commission does not have any regulatory role in the review of development cases. And there's no planning and zoning commission hearings or city council hearings. This is an administrative process, except what we're doing in terms of reviewing certificates. So,
well, it's not a certificate, Sarah. I think it's more of whether or not we accept the cultural resource study.
Right. Today we're looking at the cultural resource study, which determines how Lauren will request and process certificates in the next 2 steps.
Okay, so then I think I'll just close after saying that I agree with everything Commissioner Hayes said about not agreeing with the findings, that I'd like to know who the Mason was, because maybe we can find out who the Mason was. We had some very talented Masons in Flagstaff, and I think we need to keep track of who they were.
Commissioner Buckham?
Yes, I do want to thank you for all the work that you've done on this report, but I, as well as I'm going through it, don't see how it's not historic or significant. Um, the volcanic stone is so Flagstaff. Having a building that changes and adapts is kind of a unique Flagstaff thing. Um, so yes, I also kind of disagree with the findings as well.
Commissioner Horn, did you have anything? I'll take.
Sorry, I had to push for my phone. No, I agree with what the previous commissioners have stated, but I don't have anything to add to their comments.
Great, thanks. I just had 2 things. One is a question for Cornerstone. Besides this photo of construction and the one of the fire truck, did you find any historic photos of the building? It's just really hard to, you mentioned there's a bunch of external changes, but it's like hard to see what they are if we don't have any, like, is there no photo from 1962 of the outside of that building?
There were numerous photos from like when it was first constructed and this fire department photo, but not a ton of historical photos, at least in newspaper clippings or other archival sources that we could find. We could include more of those in the report, but there were not, I wouldn't say there was an excess of historical photos of the building that we came across.
Not even
Um,
photos of like downtown 4th of July parades passing the building or anything like that?
Sam, do you recall any more that we came across?
I don't recall. I recall photos of downtown parades that were on like adjacent streets that I would always I would like look closely and try to glean to see if City Hall was in it. But a good photo of City Hall, I was not able to find any of the newspapers that I checked.
Okay.
We can definitely, you know, do another pass and look for additional photos of City Hall and historic those newspapers. But kind of like Jack said, there wasn't an excess that was coming out when we were doing our dive through the archives.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I just definitely love to see more historic photos of the facade as a comparison if you are arguing that it has changed. Lauren?
And yeah, I'll touch on that too. So that's been touched on as well. We're not making a strong argument that the facade of the building is heavily diminished in terms of integrity at this point. It is not that changed from how it appeared historically, and I agree that somebody who viewed it historically would certainly recognize it today as the building that it was. It really comes down to more of the significance aspect and whether it actually qualifies under any of those criteria. So I fully acknowledge that the integrity of design is still present in many ways, if only slightly diminished by some of the changes over time. But that's very much a secondary aspect of what we're looking at here.
Just a second. Lauren?
And just to piggyback on that and just focus the conversation, it is the integrity aspects conversation, as Jack said, is secondary and is somewhat irrelevant if they didn't find it significant in the first place. So I know several of you have mentioned that you disagree with the aspects of integrity's finding. And that's fine, and those revisions can be made, but that doesn't change the overall findings of the report. So if you, the significance, I think, is the bigger thing to focus on, because if they, otherwise it's just an update, administrative, it's not going to change the overall findings. So I think focusing on the changes to, you know, again, things that have been mentioned, areas of further research to go back and evaluate the, you know, strengthening the historic context and the significance evaluation is the biggest point. And then I also wanted to say, make sure Jack and Sam have a chance to answer any of the points that have already been brought up, asking if you did research them, because maybe some of that can be cleared up right now. Like if you looked at and you do have information about the Mason, or you already know you couldn't find any of that information, or any of the other things that the commissioners have brought up so far, if there's a chance that we can, you know, discuss or answer any of that right now, please feel free to do so.
I just had one more point, and then we'll turn it over to them to see if they have any follow-up on these, and then we'll go back through again if anyone has any question. Does that sound? Or did you want to directly respond to something?
Well, I would like to respond to something Lauren said. I did mention significance and that I would like it to be evaluated on a local level. And when I look at Flagstaff's criteria, to me, it seems that it is significant under B and D. And I think that that wasn't emphasized enough, and that should be revisited. I don't see it eligible on a national level, of course, for any significance, but I do think it is on a local level.
Thank you. And I would just say, again, if they're, you know, why under those, like what is missing from, what did they miss to point them to go back? Unless you're just saying, you know, like if the information mentioned, you know, the criterion B individuals, you disagree and think that, yes, they are significant at a local level, or are they missing something about, you know, one of that needs additional research to support the argument?
I mean, I just like also to add that just because it is a political building does not mean it's automatically eligible as a politically important building. And so that's why I think building things like, no, I think Mayor Wheeler was really important. There's a park named after him and he was really instrumental. We've got this early legislation about dark skies, or, you know, the airport, like places in town are named for people who exist as political figures because of this building. Like
I think that that's a great point. And also, again, I think the report essentially argues that it was city business as usual, and which in itself is not significant. So, what specifically about the city business that was conducted there, or those individuals, or the architecture of the building, rises to that. And that's what we need to focus on, what we would like, what you, if you are requesting revisions, want them to focus on.
Well, I'd like to see a little bit more information that, like Jesse brought up and stuff, that could flesh out some more information about the social and political role in the community, but also under D, architectural, method of construction and artistic values, and looked at it on a local level, because I think it is distinctive for Flagstaff. You're not going to see a building like that, say, in Phoenix, or even probably like Santa Fe. So I think it's very Flagstaff.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think a lot of buildings in town that are built out of the stone, that's part of why they're under D, is because, or Flagstaff's criterion D, is because they are built in that local style. Commissioner Westheimer, did you want to?
So Lauren, or sorry, I'm a casual person. What I think I heard you say is just because the people hired by the people who want to demolish the building make these claims, we can't challenge them. I mean, that's a conflict of interest, and I think our role is to make sure that that document is legitimate and it's not just something paid for by the person who wants to demolish the building. So
it is. I'm just trying to encourage you to point them to how they can actually revise it, and not just say, I disagree. It needs to be, you need to do more research and provide more analysis in this area. And I think, you were missing this under, city criterion D. You were not talking about the local use of this stone as being locally significant.
that's not enough.
No, that's what she's saying we need to do.
That's what I'm asking you to provide, is that, and not just saying, I disagree with your findings, because we do want to move forward. They do need to revise the report and bring it back to you. So we're trying to provide them as much guidance as possible in what you want to see moving forward, so we could get to findings that the commission accepts.
Well, it sounds like then what we've got going on is two separate things. We want research in some different areas. It looks like they have tried to find other historic photos, which answers one of my questions about more things that I would like to see. And maybe they can answer in just a second about if they've looked into the role of the courts. And then that we potentially disagree with their findings on the significance of the building under Flagstaff local criteria B, C, D, and E. And so maybe those are like the two areas we need to look at. What areas of interest that we would like them to investigate more? And then in what ways do we disagree with their findings, and what would we like them to look at? And maybe that will overlap with the research part. Is that a fair summary of what's going on here?
I think it's difficult because with adaptive reuse, they changed the bays and they had to. And so I don't think that makes it weak. I think it's just what it is.
That's this integrity, and that's not part of what we're doing, or what Lauren does not want us to do, because that doesn't actually help.
Well, and it's fine to, make comments on the integrity, but as Jack summarized, if they just focus on changing the integrity argument, that doesn't change the findings of the document. So it's really the significance that changes the findings. So that's why I asked to focus on that. Because if it's not significant, it doesn't matter how much integrity it does or does not retain. The integrity aspect is really important. If you found that it's significant, then it also has to retain integrity.
I think in general, just looking at things on a local scale. So that looking at the design locally, and then in the integrity, he references that it is not a good example of international building style. I think it's a good example of Flagstaff.
So on the criterion side then, and I think it sounds like we agree that it's not nationally important, but it is locally important. So that's their criterion A. Criterion B, we perhaps want more investigation into the role of courts, perhaps events like the protests that went on during the 60s and how those maybe shaped city council decisions and like Supreme Court cases and things like, or not Supreme Court cases, local court cases. So that would be criterion B. We'd like to see more investigation into that. C, I think they've done a good job of arguing that the architect is not necessarily significant. So maybe that's one that we could disregard, unless anyone wants to fight me on that. And then we've got D, which sounds like the one we're arguing most for, that it is a local style. Perhaps it's got use of local masons. And then E, I mean, there's not going to be archaeological resources on that lot. So I think E is also one that isn't necessarily something that's going to be able to be significant.
I would also like to see discussion of the construction methods. Look pretty interesting. And whether or not that's a veneer of the Malpai or if it's structural, that I would like to have included.
Yeah, and that would go under D. Questions we have about the significant finding under D.
I think that its association with the post-World War II building boom in Flagstaff is significant, and that should be included.
Yeah, that would be the period or region and the events, post-war housing, and the boom of population here in Flagstaff.
You could leave out the interior parts so that we don't have to listen to that again, because I don't think we have anything to say about the interior.
I was also concerned about the overuse of changes to the interior. And I know this is going back to integrity, but because this isn't a NRHP designation, I don't know that it needs as much focus on interior changes. I think it really overshadowed the exterior.
I just note Commissioner Horn has her hand up online.
Oh yes, Commissioner Horn.
Thanks. I had another comment about looking at the Malpais architecture. And for me, I'd also like to see how that's been treated in the evaluation and the significance that is played in other historic buildings in town, whether it's part of a district or individually considered, and just how significant it's been in other places. Because I feel like one of the other commissioners made this point, but if you were to do a slideshow of historic buildings across Arizona, I think we could all pick out the Malpais structures from Flagstaff.
Cornerstone. Did you guys look into the courts, find anything on that line? Anything about the construction? Anything else we've mentioned?
So as part of the newspaper articles that briefly talked about the description of the construction of City Hall, they mentioned a little bit about construction, but nothing really in depth or substantive. They mentioned that there could be some reinforced concrete in it. They talk about the structural beams that get put in. But it was, it wasn't in depth. It was a pretty brief, just like, hey, look at the new City Hall's going up. But we can definitely look more into articles from back then to see if they talk about any local masons that were involved in the work, or any more detailed construction styles that were used, and we can include those. The City Hall was functioning during a very important time in the United States history, so I did do some research into whether or not there was any court cases, any protests with civil rights, with desegregation, with protests. And I did, I understandably did find some stuff for Flagstaff. One of the bigger things I saw was for the desegregation of the school districts. But a lot of the conversations I saw around that kind of put the emphasis more on the schools themselves and the personnel involved with the school districts and the school administration. And there was hardly any mention of City Hall being involved whatsoever. But we can definitely look more into that. It sounds like I apologize, I'm forgetting the commissioner's name. But it sounds like you had some knowledge about protests that were ongoing there in the 60s that you mentioned might not have been written down. We would love to hear more information about that. It sounds like you have firsthand experience with it.
I think it's, under these two main criteria that we're looking at right now. One would be association with historic events, and the other would be architectural significance. And for the both specifically local to Flagstaff, I think for the association with historic events, we looked at civil unrest during the 60s and 70s. We couldn't find anything that really directly tied this building into those larger social events in the town or country. But we can certainly look into that closer and see if we can find that. In terms of the architecture, it is certainly unique to Flagstaff in a lot of ways. So we can take a closer look at that. But yeah, really appreciate these thoughts and comments from all of the commissioners. Thank you.
Commissioner Horn. Your hand is up.
Yeah, I just had a question for Cornerstone and possibly city staff. Are there very good archives in the city that might include either construction or as-built drawings, any construction records or anything like that available?
Possibly, but I would assume probably not a lot of information that could be provided, but Cornerstone could put in a FOIA request to the city clerk's office to see what would be available. My understanding is that most of our records pre 1980 basically don't exist because they were damaged in a flood. So I don't know that that is possible, but that is an avenue that they could pursue.
Was that flood in the old city hall? Is that a significant event?
It is in the floodplain.
Question. Commissioner Buckham.
I do not have any questions at the moment, but I do agree with the points summarized by Commissioner Dale as points that I would agree that we might like to have revised in the future.
For Cornerstone, did you guys look at any? I'm looking at the list of documents, and some of it's just like Coconino County records and historical records. Did you guys look through like city council records or court case records or just any government documents from that time period? Or were those also destroyed in the flood?
We did not readily find a lot of that information. So no, we did not do an in-depth study of official government records. No.
Would those be on file with the city, like notes from the mayor's office and stuff like that?
It depends on the retention schedule. There's many things that the city and county have that have shorter retention schedules, but there's two ways usually people gain access, which is one, they can come in and request to review records in person, or they can request records be pulled for them, and that they be given copies. It's always cheaper to come in and just sit in the upstairs. I'm certain we could assist the clerk by monitoring any in-person examination of records if she would like us to.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's great that you guys are using newspapers, but not everything is going to end up in a newspaper. And if there is like a protest at a city council meeting or something like that, something small, that might show up in the records, but not necessarily. Like this is not going to end up in the newspaper. But that doesn't mean that things didn't happen here. So that might be another avenue to pursue, just to see if there are any records from.
Could I
Yes,
maybe
Commissioner
make a
Dominguez.
couple of suggestions for the consultants? One of them would be the American Indian movement. When we had the sharpshooters on top of these buildings because of the protests. And then the other one that was when the fire department went on strike and the police department was supposed to take over, and they called them police fire specialists. And they had there was, people were upset about that because the fire department was on strike and the police department had to take over. So all that stuff is in the newspapers. I know it's there. So it's just something that I think there was significance with this building. A lot of things happened in this building. Thank you.
Well, I think too, that raises a good point that just because it doesn't mention like the firefighters at City Hall went on strike doesn't mean that that event didn't occur at City Hall. So I think maybe broadening the scope of newspaper to talk about like, just because it doesn't say legislation was passed in the city council chamber doesn't mean that it wasn't happening there. And so,
Well, again, this was City Hall. This was City Hall. This is where everything happened since 1950s till the new one. I mean, everything happened in this building. So, I mean, whether it was the traffic fines, water department, the courts, you got hired at City Hall. And of course, you had the firemen that lived at City Hall. There was actually a pole there that they would slide down to the fire trucks. And then there was the volunteers. So I just can't wrap my head around that this building is not significant. I'm sorry. Thank you.
that was one of my thoughts too, reading the report was like, did nothing important happen for 30 years in Flagstaff? No legislation was passed, no court cases were had, no one important was ever in these. But I mean, I guess that is just sort of like, just because things happen there, general business does not mean it's significant, but it feels weird to say like nothing happened for 30 years in Flagstaff. All right, who had their hand up first? I can't, was it Commissioner Horn? Commissioner Horn and then Commissioner Buckham.
Yeah, I was just thinking, I don't have a list of your references in front of me, so you might have already looked here, but I think another source would be NAU Special Collections and Archives and the NAU newspaper, which is searchable online on the Special Collections and Archives website, because I think it might be following some of those student protests in a way that perhaps the city newspaper was not.
Klein Library is mentioned, but the university newspaper is not. Commissioner Buckham?
I was going to make a similar suggestion of Klein Library Special Collections. I know that they have a lot of their oral interview collections, digital transcripts available. Those might also be helpful as well, and as well as the NAU newspapers.
Yeah, they mentioned the Arizona Memory Project as one of the sources, but none of the listed sources appear to be oral histories. So that might be something to, again, sort of broadening the scope out from City Hall to maybe some of the people, or I'm sure you guys know how to search things. I'm not questioning that, but just to get at some of the scope that we're thinking about here.
That's fine.
Anything else from Cornerstone? Things we've mentioned, you're like, yeah, we totally did that. Why do you keep talking about it?
Oh, I'll just mention that I fully agree with the kind of assessment that yes, it was City Hall, so it's important. It is certainly an important building, and I hope we didn't downplay that too much. It was City Hall, and a lot of important things happened there over the years. I guess, yeah, the what it comes down to is that for our research, we were really looking for whether important things happened that rose to a level that that building was associated with important things in town to a level that that building must be preserved and found significant because of the particular event that happened there. And I think that's just not quite what we were seeing. Again, we didn't want to downplay the events that did happen there, which are very valid. We just didn't find anything that quite seemed to rise to the local level that made that building important because X thing happened there. But if we did dig into these other resources and find that that is possible to change, but if anybody has any insight into that, that would be helpful.
Yeah, thanks for clarifying that line of thinking. Commissioner Horn?
I just wanted to have a quick response to one thing that was just said then. Just because even if this building is determined to be significant, it doesn't necessarily mean that it will be preserved in perpetuity. Like there's multiple steps to like, one is it significant? Does it have integrity? And then what's going to happen to it? So all those are steps in the process, but you know, it doesn't predetermine what the ultimate treatment would be.
But I think the importance is this is all we're going to have left because they're going to tear it down. We can't stop that. Although I would think that a really good architect for their project could incorporate that facade into a new building, which would be a really smart move. But this is all we're going to have left, and we want it to be a really good document.
Well, and the distinction too between significant and non-significant is if it's not significant, it gets torn down and that's it. But if it's significant, we can request mitigation measures in some sort of way that help preserve its memory at the very least. And I think that's part of what I'm grappling with as a member of this commission, that we are sort of slowly losing these buildings. And also too, in the report, you know, it mentions like there are better examples of this, but that doesn't mean that our building is a bad example of it and that it's okay to tear it down because something else, you know, is a better representation of this time period. And that to me does not make it less significant. It just maybe makes other buildings more significant.
But they're not better examples of Flagstaff international style architecture. The two that were cited are not better. They're different.
And I would just add to the architecture point that is part of it, is that you're really looking at, is this, you know, an early example, a late example, or the best example? And so not every single example is going to be significant. So to that point, you know, if this is the most significant local example, it's in the middle of the range. So a lot of times it's the early and late examples. And this is not, it is, as they mentioned in the report, of course, a very prevalent style of the time. So, you know, the points you mentioned, if there is something specific about what makes it locally significant and unique in that design, and maybe why you feel it's the best example of international style architecture in Flagstaff, that would be what would need to be changed.
I think Amy's point too, that looking at how other Flagstaff buildings with this multi-zone are, how they're incorporating that language into their, you know, nominations or eligibility reports would also be useful.
I will just note though that talking about it as being heavily prevalent does devalue the significance, as everyone has mentioned that.
Okay,
So
maybe
that is
not
part of it,
prevalent.
but maybe then if this is, you know, the only example of the international style, although of course it's not, because the post office is too, that has Malpays stone. But if it was that, you know, very unique for this style to have incorporated the stone, you know, that's where it's locally significant, not just that it is the stone, as many others are significant because of that. So like finding what exactly, ferreting that out, you know, why you feel it's significant for having that.
I meant recognizable, not prevalent. Commissioner Westheimer, then Commissioner Hayes.
I wanted to add to that, I think it is a very unique building and therefore significant, because if it is also international design compared with the 22 North LaRue, which is completely different mid-century modern or international style, or whatever term you want to use, totally different design, totally different materials, post office, totally different. That this is so unique because the city chose in 1950s to continue using the local stone and to incorporate more modern elements with the local stone, which has been used here from the very beginning. And I just think it's a really unique and wonderful building.
Thank you, Commissioner Westheimer. I think that is probably the exact feedback, you know, that Cornerstone is looking for in revising that section.
I just wanted to add, without looking at a study of all the other buildings with Malapai stone in Flagstaff, what I remember is that most of them aren't designed really. Some of them look like they may have been just built by whoever owned the property, right? Some of the ones on the south side are the one that's the lingerie store. It doesn't have any particular design style to it. This building is designed. It has a design feel to it, and that sort of stands out amongst the others.
Sarah?
Commissioner Dale, I know earlier, since we started this conversation earlier, someone else has joined the meeting. I don't know if anyone is here for public participation, but I wanted to bring that up.
Yes, to the two members of our audience. Does anyone have any comments on this? Members of the public?
He's the representative owner from the owner of the that contracted with Cornerstone.
Looks like no. Well, it sounds like we are not ready to accept this report. Though there are a couple more lines of investigation that we would like to see explored, such as the court records, oral histories, perhaps any city or county records. What am I missing? Other eligible property reports with this kind of Malpais, and that we would like to see some reevaluation of significance under Flagstaff's criteria B and D. Is that correct? Yes, especially regarding the architectural style, for all the reasons that Commissioner Westheimer and Commissioner Hayes just very wonderfully articulated in these last comments. Is that, what am I missing? This has been like an hour and a half long conversation. I want to make sure I grab everything. Oh, and let's focus on interior. And any more historic photos you got. Yeah, of course.
Probably get in trouble for this, but when you come back, would you please come into the building so we can actually hear you? And I think it would help a lot for us to understand what you're saying because you were cutting in and out and garbled. And I think when you're here with us, there'll be more of a commitment to communicate with us than to just recite the plan. So if you would come in, you're only a few blocks away. It would be really great. Thanks.
Certainly, yes, we can do that. So yeah,
Commissioner Hayes? All right, go ahead, Jack.
Oh yes, so thank you very much for the feedback. We have some specific points that we can look into to kind of help flesh that out with towards the objective of meeting the commission's observation that the structure is historically significant for under historic events and architecturally. Is that my understanding?
Yeah, Flagstaff's criterion B and D.
Yes.
So B is what events, people, yeah, culture, that kind of stuff. And then D is, I had them in front of me and now I've lost them. And then D is like architectural style.
Yep.
Commissioner Hayes, you had your finger on the button for a second. Did you? No, you've changed your mind. So do we need to make a motion? Could we, okay. Does it need to include all 7,000 of our conditions or can we have a list somewhere?
It depends what motion you want to make.
Okay.
So,
Well, it sounds like we would like to reject this or ask for revisions on this that the commission would approve. It would come back to us.
I assume that, yes, that it sounds like that's what
Okay.
you want.
I guess the question
but yeah,
was,
so-
is that okay? Is that a
Right, so you're asking them
feasible action?
to make specific revisions and bring it back to a future commission meeting for
Yes.
review.
And that would be probably July or August because the June deadline is like tomorrow, next week, which I don't think is feasible.
I think that it's been a long time since we've not accepted
Yes.
a report, but I think the way you would want to word the motion is we are not accepting the report and request the following revisions.
Okay.
I think that would be given the right way to work it. Yeah, and then request the following modifications essentially or revisions. So yeah, I think you do need to
We
list
need to
them.
list them.
You can
Okay.
be very general. I think that the applicant can use the conversation to get at the specifics.
Okay. So we want further research into. Okay, so we want to reevaluate Flagstaff criteria B and D. And we would like to see further research into the courts, correct, Commissioner Dominguez? Courts, historical events. Is that too vague?
Sounds like social events,
Okay. Social movements,
social movements.
construction. Yeah, the construction methods and process. I think that would include things like masons, right? Oh yeah, post World War II boom in Flagstaff. And
I would also like to see addressing integrity again, because on some of that, it was, you know, reflecting back to the interior, which
Yeah.
isn't really a concern here. And looking at the pictures, I wasn't buying the diminished week. So.
yes, thank you. And we would like them to look at things like oral histories, more historic photos, city records, NAU newspapers. Were there other documents that we felt were missing? Oh yeah, I think that would be city and architectural records. Anything else, Sarah? You were taking notes. Anything we're missing?
I was taking notes and I think you got all of them.
Okay. So basically we would move to not accept the report and ask for revisions with a further reevaluation of Flagstaff criteria B and D as they do further research into courts or the role of the courts in the building, social movements, construction methods and processes, and the post-World War II and Bloom Flagstaff through documents such as oral histories, historic photos, architectural and city records, and NAU newspapers. And to reduce the focus on interior integrity in their assessment. So I moved. Does that count?
I think so. You read it out loud and said, that's your motion.
It was correct, and I didn't want to say it again.
Okay.
All right, we have a motion by Chair Dale. Any seconds?
I'll second it.
A second from Commissioner Westheimer. Wait, do we need to talk about the timeline for this?
You can have discussion now.
Oh, okay, we're gonna have a quick discussion before we move on to the vote. Cornerstone, do you guys have a timeline, July, August, of when we would expect this back?
Likely, let me check the calendar here.
Just a reminder that the deadline for submissions is the last Wednesday of the month at noon. Just to make sure you're looking at the right part of the calendar.
Just for, moving things along and making sure that we're being transparent with, when we expect things to be back and they can make time in their schedule to do it. So yeah, for June, it would be due in a week. For July, it would be due June 25th. And for August, it would be due July 23rd. You said the 4th? Wednesday?
Yeah, so we'd be looking at July, the July meeting.
Okay. So you could finish it in June. Okay. Well, then that helps them plan other like workshops and stuff that we have. All right. We've had a motion, a second, and discussion. All those in favor? Wait, is there any other discussion? Sorry. Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, thank you guys so much. We appreciate the work you've put into this so far and look forward to seeing what new stuff you find.
Thank you for your feedback and attention to review, and thank you for your opinions as well. It's really invaluable to get that feedback on the significance of the property. So thank you.
Thanks, guys.
And thank you very much.
All right, we will now move on to general business. Our first item is
Commissioner
Oh.
Horn has her hand up.
Oh, Commissioner Horn.
No, I don't have anything else to add. Sorry.
Okay. We will now move on to general business. Item 7A is the historic signs and facades grant tracking.
All right, our monthly spreadsheet that we look at has been updated to reflect the two grant approvals last month. So the approval of the grant for the window replacement at 615 West Cherry and the extension of the England House grant project at 614 West Santa Fe Avenue. However, since I made this spreadsheet, today I did 3 final grant inspections for 3 of these projects. So next month will look quite different. But now the projects at 803 and a half West Aspen, 104 East Route 66, and 615 West Cherry are all complete, and we've done the final inspection. So now they're all ready to apply for reimbursement. So all of those are moving forward, which is good news. So that's it. Otherwise, and as we, probably aren't going to see any additional grant requests using this fiscal year's money. This should pretty much be the final. And then next month, I will have FY25 as well as an FY26 that we can look at for tracking as we're moving forward. So any questions about the update this month?
Are we going to get photos of the finished products you just reviewed?
Yes, I can, as part of next month's update, I'd be happy to share once it's official, the finished photos for all of those.
All right, other questions on this item? All right, so exciting to see all the projects get finished. All right, next item is 7B, discussion of the historic signs and facades grant requirements. I have been given permission to table this item to a later date if people are feeling wearied from the last very intensive conversation that we had. Or we can do this if people want to talk about I know this is something that's been on our agenda for a while, and it's 5:53. Does anyone want to go ahead? Anyone come prepared and excited to talk about? Were there specific items on this that people wanted to review? I know this was something we wanted to talk about, but I didn't know if there was like one specific section we wanted to focus on or.
It seems from the last meeting that possibly it was revising the language in the guidelines to make it more specific that grants are only for eligible or listed properties and could not be applied for a non-contributor. It was specifically the 615 West Cherry project, as that is a non-contributor in a historic district. And so although it technically qualifies under these guidelines and it is in the district and still could be providing a benefit to the district as a whole, the discussion came about of whether or not the commission wanted to see future grant applications for properties that were previously determined to be ineligible or non-contributors, or there are projects that come in that have not been evaluated, and so changing that language seemed to be the catalyst for this discussion. Commissioner Horn?
I just wondered if you may not know this, how many either ineligible or unevaluated properties have received grants in the past few years, and that may not be something you know off the top of your head.
I don't know that off the top of my head. I mean, I can go pull back up the list and look at a lot of them are eligible, and most of the folks that I've been talking to, who may apply would be. One downside of changing that and specifically requiring that they are eligible is that for someone who hasn't, who maybe owns, if, for example, the house we were talking about earlier, on East Birch, if they had wanted to apply for a grant but hadn't had to do a cultural resource study, would we require that they do one in order to make that determination to therefore be able to be eligible? So that's also a consideration with the undetermined. But there are cases, and I don't know, Sarah, if you can think of any other top of your head besides the 615 West Cherry that was previously determined to be a non-contributor. And some of it too would be going back to, or one of skipping ahead, there's a building and the approvals for that's within the overlay and has to follow the certificate process, but the Stilly building that's a non-contributor downtown. But if somebody wanted to take a non-contributor and do historically appropriate, rehabilitation on it that maybe would be restoring their integrity and making it become eligible, so that and that is specifically allowed in the grant guidelines. I think probably the sticking point with that specific property last month is that because of that second story addition, changing the windows wasn't going to restore enough integrity for it to be eligible. So then that kind of gray line of like, but are we still giving enough benefit to the district as a whole in the neighborhood for that to fall within? It falls within the guidelines, but changing the guidelines about that.
Yeah, I think the thing that you could consider in this one is, I think as Lauren said, there are changes to buildings that are reversible, and that if you reverse enough of them over time, it becomes eligible again. And then there's ones where they're not reversible anymore, and that we don't call out a difference between those two in the guidelines right now. So there's that possibly could be a way to look at it, is like, could you eventually reverse enough inappropriate materials or issues with the building that it could be restored, versus ones that have the kind of permanent changes that would make it not restorable. That's I think what the bottom line seemed to be at the last meeting. And also, this was our first year doing level 1 and level 2 requirements. Really, it was like 18 months of level 1 and level 2 requirements. And where I think we'd like feedback on, did that work? Was it clear? Do we need to look at those? We've just not had them very long. So if you have any thoughts on that, even though it wasn't mentioned at the last meeting, that'd be good to know. If we're having this discussion tonight, Lauren and Annalisa can make amendments and bring you a redlined version of the requirements next month, and then they could be approved ahead of the new fiscal year. And you could start applying them to your FY 2026 applications. So that's the timing piece of it, is you don't have to like solve everything tonight, but if you give direction on things you want to see changed, then Lauren and Annalisa can work together to address any changes. And there may be a few changes that you and Annalisa, in administering the program, might want to propose as well.
And there are some, I think I mentioned last time, but they're not part of the requirements. They're just language that doesn't really need full commission approval to change. And the major one is that we've been asked to, although it says it right here that you need to submit a W-9 to the city of Flagstaff before requesting reimbursement, we've been asked to really spell out why, which is that this could be taxable and you are going to receive a 1099-G, and add that straight in here so there's no surprises for folks later on.
Commissioner Westheimer?
I was just sort of scratching my head on this, so I didn't. When we gave a grant to a property north of the hospital for a mid-century modern, that's not in a district.
Right.
And
Or it wouldn't have been, if it was in the north end, it wouldn't have been part of the district.
So I think it gets even more complicated, because that was pretty much intact for its style and era. It didn't have an inappropriate addition on it. So I think we were okay with supporting that, but then we had someone who has in my opinion, inappropriate addition on the property, who wanted to do something on that addition as opposed to on the historic part. So it gets complicated.
Right. And north of hospital, we've actually given 2 or 3 different properties grants, and none of those buildings are in a district. We've never inventoried that area, though there's certainly enough historic buildings up there that if we were to have money to do more inventories, we would look at that as one of the possible neighborhoods to look at because there's Pat Klein and the development of the hospital falls into that historic context, as does the earliest mid-century modern neighborhoods that came up along 180. Right.
So in other contexts in my work, for instance, if it hasn't been evaluated, it's pretty much treated as eligible until evaluated. So is that the case with the city? So for instance, that mid-century modern house, we all felt that was a nice um, example of that architectural style here. It's over 50 years old. If somebody nominated it, likely would have been found eligible. So is it, if it's over 50 years old, do we just make a determination ourselves that we think it likely should be treated as eligible?
That's essentially what you're doing right now per the guidelines. Yes, is saying that you are treating it that way. You're not making an official determination at that point, but just assuming so for the purpose of the grant award, essentially, except for like the case last month where it's been determined, we know it's not eligible or a contributor.
So it doesn't have to be in a historic overlay or a historic district.
It does not.
But I could see circumstances where in a historic overlay, there may be a non-contributor where we would want the sign to maybe not be, we want it to be consistent with the characteristics of the overlay. So maybe we would maybe fund something for the overlay.
Right. Yeah, and that's where, like going back to the Stille building, you know, that would be one of those, you know, and then that's where it's like you're keeping the language essentially as is to allow you to see it, that the benefit is that it's, you know, providing to the overlay or the district at large, even if this property itself is not eligible.
I'm going to go Commissioner Horn first because her hand's been up for a while, and then Commissioner Westheimer.
I'd just like to say I appreciate this discussion and some of the points that other people have raised. And I think for me, based on that, I would say that I would like to continue to consider either unevaluated or ineligible, especially if they are within a historic district or overlay. And partly because we haven't had the 2 tiers for a while, to continue with it for a while, maybe evaluate at the end of this next fiscal year. With that said, I think one thing I might ask if we could add to the tracking sheet is what's level 1 and level 2, just so we can kind of see how those are being distributed, because sometimes the dollar amount just doesn't totally show that, you know, it just depends on what their cost was.
Sure. Yeah, we can add that.
I'm thinking about this more, and let's take the property at 418 East Birch. I just asked the owner, are you thinking of bringing your windows to the facade? Are you going to inset them as historic windows would be, which is a matter of integrity? If we want people to do things like do the windows correctly for historic reasons correctly and inset them, he is mitigating what's being called a major impact, and it would benefit the resource to then grant him, the owner, to put in better, more appropriate windows. So there's a situation where it would be great to be able to give that person a grant to encourage more appropriate historic preservation.
And I think that's a very good point, Commissioner Westheimer, that when the grant program was, you know, kind of, it used to all be in economic vitality, but when economic vitality took on the administrative and planning staff started to take on the evaluative part of the process and the inspection part of the process, it was the intent that was conveyed to me at that time was that we really wanted to make sure there were very few barriers to entry with a grant application, because we didn't want to have to force a property owner to go spend a bunch of money to get a grant. We wanted them to have a very low barrier, come in and put it in, and then it is completely at the discretion of the Heritage Preservation Commission. You set the guidelines, you can decide who gets grants or not. You can say no for a reason that's not in your criteria and just say we don't think this rises to the level of a grant project. And there's not even an appeal process for it, really. There's just just like any other grant process, it's really very highly discretionary to the commission. So, I mean, I think that how much you spell out versus how much you work out in discussions is something we should just keep checking in on. So even if you don't want any changes other than the ones administratively that Lauren and Annalisa want to make sure are coming through for tax purposes and maybe other cleanups that they'd like to see done, that's an ongoing dialogue between you and staff. And really the purpose is to, so that staff is giving good advice. When there's a request for a grant, we like to be able to tell grant applicants, this is a good grant application, or you may have some issues with the commission. They may not approve a grant application that looks like this. We never make that as a definitive statement, but we like to be able to give good advice because people spend time and effort in coming before you. So that's all, those are kind of those soft considerations that are important because they really, if you put in a lot of barriers on the front end, people don't apply for the grant. And there were some years where we were not spending all our grant money. And then there have been years where we're trying to figure out how much money we have because we're really close to the top. And those are great years, right? And some of it's the market and some of it's the costs and some of it's how well we're advertising and making the program known. And so all of those things kind of factor in along with, any year where we're low, if you think we've created too many barriers, we can take them off. And any year we're high and we think we want to be more selective, we can try and be predictive that way, but it might pan out for various reasons in a different manner. So just keep that in mind. That's kind of intent and also some of the practicalities of how staff and you may be continuing to evaluate these guidelines over time.
Yeah,
I saw a hand up.
Commissioner Horn, your hand was up. Did you take it down? It's up
I
again.
did, yeah, because Sarah made some of the points I was going to make about we have money left, so I don't think we have to be highly selective at this point about who gets grant.
I agree with the clarification of the W-9 and seeing that change. I think it's fine to leave it open the way that it is. Personally, we might be getting more grants now, but we can turn people down. We can say no, and maybe we just as commission need to start being selective, at least, for the time being. I think the level 1 and level 2 is working well. I think we've seen some really good, but not an overwhelming number of level 2 projects, and I commend the HPO office and individual for doing the work on those and making sure that they're meeting the Secretary of Interior standards both before and after we see those grants. So if there's anything you need to see more from us to take some of that off your plate, like if it's not working on your end, that's something we can consider. But as a commission, I think it's a good use of the funds that we have.
I think for us, it's really just making those administrative tweaks so we see some better applications, and setting those expectations up from the front. And although some of the language says in here, you're gonna have to submit that W-9, you're gonna have to submit invoices for everything. We've gotten a little bit of feedback on making some of that clearer for applicants. So those are the only real tweaks that I see. And I had some other potential tweaks to the spreadsheet to provide a little more information. And thank you, Commissioner Horn, for your suggestion. And that's a great one that I can add as well.
All right, other questions or comments on this item?
Okay, thank you.
All right, we will now move on to item 8, approvals. What highlights we got in here?
Yeah, we have quite a few, so I will just quickly go through them, not spend a ton of time. I know we're past our 6 o'clock, so but please feel free to ask any specific ones that you have questions about. 8A1 is a letter report for 500 North Beaver, which is in the North End Historic District, but mid-century outside the period of significance for the district, never been evaluated before. So this was evaluated by Enviro Systems, but the building has seen quite a few modifications over time, a major one converting the original garage bay to something else. So, and finding that it was not significant, did not retain integrity. And let's see, so in contrast to that, the 23 East Fine building is listed as a contributor to the North End Historic District. And this letter report was, this is actually the EnviroSystems building. So EnviroSystems also did the study of their building, and they have some very major structural issues that they need to deal with. And so this report was a fun chance for them to dig up some fun history about their building and a connection to Smokey Bear, as well as really look at the impacts, potential impacts to the project, which are gonna, they're really gonna follow best practices and the Secretary of the Interior standards for rehabilitation in this work. And so as committed cultural stewards, they will, found that there won't be a major impact. And I will, as the HPO, continue to monitor the project to make sure it meets those standards as it comes through for various permitting. Commissioner Hayes.
I think they should put a plaque outside that the person who found the Smokey Bear
Right, yeah.
lived there.
Yeah, pretty neat. The report author was very excited to tell me about the Smokey Bear connection. So, and let's see, so I briefly mentioned 17 North LaRue. That is a Stille building that's in the overlay, but is a non-contributor to the district due to previous inappropriate alterations. But because it's in the overlay, this one, as well as 21 East Aspen, number 5, came in for certificates of no effect for new signs that the businesses are putting up, and the signs meet our criteria for signs and are eligible for a certificate of no effect. And number 4 is a letter report study of two buildings on a parcel on very South 4th Street, and determining the eligibility or significance of those buildings, which were also determined not to be significant. And let's see, skipping down. Oh, sorry. No. There's too many this month. That's the 4601 South Lake Mary. South 4th Street is the archaeology, which I found isolated occurrences, which are not eligible, and not a whole lot more. So that's number 4. 4601 South Lake Mary is the 2 structures. And then the 615 West Cherry is the grant that you saw last month. And this is just the formal coming in, applying for the certificate to get the window permit, which was also approved. So that is the summary of the flurry of things that came in April and early May. Yes, Commissioner Westheimer.
My printer or my computer and printer weren't working, so I had someone print for me because I like this stuff in paper. 17 North LaRue Street, the certificate of no effect application and the proposed signage wouldn't print. So just an FYI on that.
Like
and also
Okay.
the cultural resource study for the 4th Street South Ladder report wouldn't print.
And do you know if they opened and the links worked? Did anyone else have trouble accessing them?
I'll find out.
Okay, just one trying to diagnose the problem. But okay.
I'll let you know. Oh, and then the 21 East Aspen, there's a note wouldn't print. So I'll find out more info and let you know.
And I can always provide other links or printing services if needed.
I think we can also like delete and re-upload
Right.
with a different format or something if
Yeah.
it didn't come through well.
Yeah, it does have to be a PDF, but if across the board everyone's having trouble accessing them, let me know and I can create new links or send it to you directly.
I printed them as PDFs to my desktop, but I actually realized the ones that she called out are not in the folder when I put them all in there.
So I wonder then if maybe there's a collation issue with the full packet that they're not in there. So, okay. Well, thank you for the feedback. We will.
But were you able to open them or you just downloaded them?
I opened them and read them on my computer, but I downloaded them into a folder for here so I could reference them. and I see that they're not in that folder.
Interesting. We'll take that to the clerk's office because they run the Agenda Quick software and see if we can troubleshoot that in the next week or two.
That's a strange
Nancy and
one.
I can work on that.
Any other questions about the approvals? All right, so consultations, are there any consultation items? I don't. there's
You did start a consultation this month, or DOT did.
They did. It's not on here as an agenda item, happened after the agenda, but the Federal Railroad Administration sent Section 106 consultation on reports for the Downtown Mile project to SHPO and the tribes.
Is this for the third rail?
Yes, and everything associated. Yeah, with the project, yeah. So, and there's not much of note there. They did perform a negative class 3 survey, which I'm sure the archaeologists and the audience are not particularly surprised by. And there are very minimal visual changes and there are no direct impacts to built environment resources and very minimal visual changes. And so although they did do, in SHPO's opinion, probably more work than they needed to documenting the adjacent buildings within a half-mile radius of the project, the SHPO's concurred with the finding that there is not an adverse effect. So, but ongoing edits with those.
I assume then that will come to us in July. June.
Yes.
It's May.
Yeah.
I know how time works.
Yeah, I can add those, the consultation item. And it would, again, not a review item, just a report on it.
Sorry, by come to us, I meant would be in the agenda. All right, miscellaneous items, unless there's any other questions or comments on approvals and reports. All right, miscellaneous items. What you got for us?
Sure. So the May Hicks Curtis House was moved last week to the city facility on Butler, the materials recycling facility. And there is a project website, which is flagstaff.az.gov/Hicks House. And I had it pulled up to show you drone footage, but I will let you all watch it on your own time if you were so interested. But we've got drone footage and other video and of the event posted there, both the slide of the house onto the adjacent parcel and all of the footage from the big move. So is there now. Stay tuned for more updates on that. And quite a few of us attended the State Historic Preservation Conference last week. So Sarah added this as an agenda item. If anyone wants to speak about specific updates, they have to share from the conference.
Real quick on the May Hicks House, congratulations on having it listed on the most endangered historic places.
Yes,
I don't think that's been since our last meeting.
It has been, yes.
I think that Lauren's media tour has been a bit of a whirlwind because she had to do a ton of media and then move a house in the middle of the night and then get up the next morning and be on a panel at the State Historic Preservation Conference last week. So I really feel like she's done a tour to Arizona on this. And I think Sunday, May 18th was when the National Trust had their like individual media day for the May Hicks House. So you might also find some things on the Trust website under their May 18th press releases and outreach. But yes, there's been many of those things going on.
Yeah, quite a lot on May Hicks, but the big one is the house is moved. So it's no longer under threat of the wrecking ball.
Do we officially own it?
Not that I know of.
It's just an object on a city property that we are in the process of acquiring.
I added it to the city insurance, so If
Yeah.
that counts, then,
We've insured
then
it.
we own it.
Those are just details.
Yeah.
I just want to say you did a really nice presentation on the May Hicks house and the drone footage everybody really liked in the audience at the Historic Preservation Conference.
Thank you, Commissioner.
So it was very surprising, I thought, and I think a lot of people were saying that how smooth and like the house didn't like rock or that you went down through the dip on the south side and it was fine.
It was pretty fun. I know everybody, yeah, I've gotten a lot of questions of like, well, what, fell off the house while you were moving it? And nothing. Yeah. Garrett Denny, our contractor, does a great job.
I think it should be on the record that Commissioner Buckham gave a Teams hand clap.
I think the other thing I was going to mention about it is that the um, the next step in the process would probably be worth just mentioning really quick. Like, we're doing this blitz of media, and we've gotten a lot of attention on the house, and now it's moved. And
Sure.
what are we
Sorry.
looking for next?
I apologize. I'm trying to shortcut and wrap us up here, but I will spend more time on these items. So the next step is, of course, stabilization of the house while it is on this temporary parcel. And so immediate stabilization, what do we need to preserve the building? So the building fabric does not deteriorate any further. And we're going to use a city on-call contract with Lovin Contracting to do that. Have a kickoff meeting with them on the 27th, next Tuesday. And then they're also scoping them to do a condition assessment. So we can really start looking at all of what we need to do to rehabilitate it for the future. And we're successful, hopefully, I don't think it's totally final yet, in getting a little bit of funding from the city budget for that next year and another grant award from which I believe I mentioned before, but and shared the news with you, from the Arizona Community Foundation and the Historic Route 66 Association of Arizona provided money for that second phase, the condition assessment and stabilization. So that's up next, and then all of the big conversations of where's it going, what's the use going to be, what's the timeline for that. Commissioner Westheimer?
Are you going to remove the stucco?
From what I've seen, there's very little of the original siding left. Most of it has been removed. It's mostly plywood under there in quite a few places. So that I'm sure that will be scoped out in the condition assessment as a range of possibilities, but my opinion right now is probably not. It was, stucco during its period of significance. So although that was not the original, but most of the original fabric is gone. And what remains is in pretty bad shape. So we'll see what we find. But interesting.
I suspect if you look where there were not repairs, you'll find something different than where there were repairs.
Yeah, it's looking like it was probably board and batten originally, from certain parts of it. At least the original section of the building addition could be different. So we'll see. But I think as the argument, could be made that as it is now is all happened during the period of significance, it might be worth, keeping it as is and repairing it versus removing everything and having a much bigger undertaking.
And stucco in nature is cyclic and has a use life, so it gets replaced. It's
Yes.
like roofs,
Right.
it doesn't last forever.
Absolutely.
All right, moving on from the May Hicks house, the 2025 HP conference. I was there for like 4 hours for my session. But it was fun. There were a lot of people there.
There were.
fun place.
A big shout out to Commissioner Hayes for being the only federal employee there and being there as a City of Flagstaff commissioner on leave from the federal government and not as a federal employee, but representing the entire federal government, our commissioner.
There was retired federal employees there.
True, yes. There were retired federal employees. But yeah, thanks to everyone who went, and yeah, more to come. Really, the biggest update that could potentially affect us as a certified local government is that our State Historic Preservation Office, who administers the Certified Local Government Program, and Ariana, who came to do the training for us in February, and we would like to come back later this summer. They do not have any current funding from the state or federal government, so there is a chance that they will not be funded or operable post August of this year. So that could potentially, if that happens, be a change for us as a certified local government, how that program operates, and also potential grant monies that we could or could not receive, trainings that we receive from SHPO, that sort of thing, as well as change how consultation on projects like the Downtown Mile work. So stay tuned for those updates.
Just add that they changed something on the schedule. They canceled the neon sign work session and had one about federal funding. And some of what some of the presenters talked about is they met with the governor's office, and the governor's office didn't really know how the SHPO operates. They have so many different independent little agencies and whatnot. So they relayed that the governor's office was unaware that the state has not provided funding to the SHPO office since 2012. So hopefully that is a change. But yeah, my understanding is that their funding hasn't been released and they run out of funds at the end of July.
And if anyone else who attended want to share any thoughts, just thank the 3 commissioners who were able to attend. And then the youth summit, I mentioned this last time we took a quick poll of who maybe wants to participate. Details are still unconfirmed and potentially forthcoming, but it looks like they will mostly be in Flagstaff just on Wednesday, June 4th. And at this point, what they are thinking is having a lunch at Reardon Mansion, which is unconfirmed. They were trying to reach out to Reardon to confirm today to get back to me before the meeting, but it hasn't happened yet. But it'd be lunch at Reardon Mansion on Wednesday, June 4th, and invite our commissioners to attend, and it'd probably be like informal, unstructured, kind of meet and greet with the students participating in the summit. So I know last time there were a few folks who are potentially interested, depending on schedules. So if you are interested, let me know and I will forward you the details as they are confirmed. And Commissioner Westheimer, I don't know if they've gotten back to you, but they haven't nailed down much of that day. So I don't know whether or not they'll be able to fit in a town site, CLT discussion. They have decided to remove visiting the May Hicks house from the agenda as they have limited time, and it is somewhat logistically challenging since they mostly travel, I think, by tour bus, trying to get them behind the public works yard.
Lauren, is it an all-day commitment or is it scheduled?
It would just be lunch.
Just a lunch.
Just for you all, yes. That they just be that unconfirmed lunch at Reardon Mansion.
Okay.
So
It takes a long time to travel. That would cut into the time they have to do things.
yeah, and it sounds like they're basically, although they're staying in Flagstaff, they're spending all of Monday and Tuesday out of town, going to Winslow and Williams, et cetera. And they are trying to fit in a pretty packed agenda here, going all over the place on Wednesday. So still unconfirmed, and then Thursday they're having their kind of closing town hall at Klein Library Thursday morning. And then I don't know if they have anything scheduled for Thursday afternoon or if that's just wrap up travel. So Wednesday was the day they posed to us as potential things. And they're talking to a lot of other folks besides me and Commissioner Westheimer. So, potentially trying to do a visit at McAllister Ranch. I heard they might be going to Picture Canyon with sustainability and doing invasive weed pulling was, and also with Sean Hammond of the site steward program at SHPO. So there's a lot of things, kind of floating out there that they're trying to nail down the agenda. But so I will let you know when that's confirmed.
Right, other items from or to commission members?
We did do the Historic Preservation Month proclamation with the mayor and city council last night. It was also Public Works Week, so the whole Public Works staff practically was here. And we made sure, Lauren made sure to wave at them and say, thank you so much for hosting the May Hicks House. And several of them are very excited that to have roles and from facilities and others in helping generate some excitement about the project. So Lauren got the city staff rearing and ready to go
Yeah.
as
Although,
part of that.
Also dwarfed by the 400 public works employees who showed
Yeah,
up.
there were
And then the
400
last one
public
was
work
a-
was
was-
rescue puppies.
Yeah, was National Rescue Dog Adoption Day. So
There were puppies here.
possibly got showed up by Public Works and the puppies for adoption, but still got the word out there.
Maybe next year for Historic Preservation Month, the commission could think of, we could start working on having some activities or other things that we might want to be doing in the community that we haven't been doing Historic Preservation Month or Planning Month in Flagstaff, which Planning Month is October. And it's just how thin our time has been so valuable. It's been hard to invest in those things, but that maybe this is a good first step in trying to get all of those things kind of in front of the public more regularly.
And the state focuses on March as Archaeology and Heritage Awareness Month. Is that what it's called? That the SHPO does. And that's a big one for them, and they do a lot of programming around that too. So that could be a potential future. The SHPO does more in March than they do in May, but lining everything up with May Hicks, it seemed like a good time. And just for the record, I did also force council to watch some of the drone footage.
Next year being the 100-year anniversary for Route 66, we could do something about Route 66 for next May.
And include puppies and kittens,
Right, yeah.
just for the attention.
I think-
Everything is made better by puppies and kittens.
We could call it historic preservation
Perfect.
on Route 66. So I don't get to name things. All right, anything else to commission? Anything from commission?
So I made a couple of notes. One is if we could ask local people to please come in to speak with us, I think we would avoid those audio problems because I could not understand that man for a lot of it. And I understand computer problems, boy, do I ever, but they're only a few blocks away. So it would be more, in my opinion, respectful of everyone's time in the commission if they came in and had a conversation with us and presented here in the building. So that's one thing. And then also if we could have a conversation sometime about it's kind of philosophical, but adaptive reuse is something good for preservation. But if then it comes back to us as this building doesn't have integrity anymore because there was adaptive reuse, maybe we need to explore that and think about it and figure out how we deal with that.
Other items from commission? I have one. I will be gone in June for my archaeology field school. We are running public tours again if anyone wants to come and look at some cans. It's very exciting. We're running public tours June 7th and June 17th. And then I'll also be gone in July, so Alicia will be filling in for chair. And in case Alicia's out, any volunteers to be co-chair? Commissioner Horn has logged off.
This would be a good opportunity to be a practice co-chair.
It's very exciting. You don't
Vice
have
chair.
to do anything except for when I'm gone. Okay, well, I guess if it comes up, it comes up, but just in case. Oh, I think Commissioner Horn is back. There just might be a need for someone to step in for Commissioner Hayes in case, sickness, spontaneous vacations, need to recuse yourself.
I get stage fright and don't show up.
You've got a gavel though.
was gonna say, stage fright.
They should be afraid of you.
Gavel enthusiasm.
I might have to come in here, sometime and practice.
Any other items from commission? All right, we were very efficient. Oh, go ahead, Sarah.
You can go ahead and adjourn.
Oh, I was also going to say, can someone check this clock? It is a half an hour off now. It's slowly been getting worse and worse every
I have
meeting.
reported it to IT.
Okay.
When it originally came up, and
I'll tell.
I'm under the impression that they get quite a few complaints and haven't yet to figure out how to fix it.
The current city computer clock says 6:36.
Okay, that's what my laptop says too. All right, any last things? All right, it is May 21st, 2025 at 6:36 p.m. and the Flagstaff Heritage Preservation Commission meeting is over.
Make sure
Have a good night, everyone.
Hi, everybody.